KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, and online at kpfa.org. The time is 2:30. Up next, Education Today.
From the studios of KPFA in Berkeley, this is Education Today. Good afternoon and welcome to Education Today. Today we interview Alfie Kohn, a well-known education author who thinks we should stop feeling guilty about being nice to our kids. And later on in the program, we interview one of the authors of an important study on gentrification, which has come out recently. And the Alameda County Health Department has been very involved in it, and gentrification has a huge impact on our kids, particularly in urban communities. Welcome to Education Today, Alfie. You say in your new book that the U.S. has a deeply conservative ideology about children, and I wonder if you could tell us what you mean by that.
Even people who are relatively progressive or at least centrist on political issues tend to accept uncritically a very conservative set of beliefs about kids, how to raise them and what they're like. For example, the conventional wisdom these days is that children are spoiled, won't be able to make their way in the real world. Parents, on the one hand, are too permissive, not setting limits, and on the other hand, somehow are too overprotective, becoming helicopter parents, that kids have inflated self-esteem, a sense of entitlement. They get everything from trophies to grades too easily. And each of these separate beliefs I unpack and try to show in The Myth of the Spoiled Child to be based on false or at least greatly exaggerated empirical beliefs, but also on a troubling ideology that probably would be rejected by many people once they realized the underpinning of what they've come to accept.
So you're trying to give them a chance to examine it more critically. I know that one of the things that you have made a case against is some of the school practices. You make a case against what you call higher standards, and you have even questioned universal pre-kindergarten, and these are two things which people do accept sort of uncritically, and I wonder if you could tell us a bit about your thoughts on how this relates to what we should and should not be doing with children.
Well, I think most of the books I've written and most of the talks I give are about education. This book, The Myth of the Spoiled Child, looks only briefly at educational issues, including false claims about grade inflation, but then moves off in a different direction. But elsewhere, sure, I've talked about how we undermine kids' excitement about learning and critical thinking with a corporate-style, top-down, test-driven approach to reform. I challenged not the idea of universal pre-K, but the way that pre-K is often managed, which is more about forcing a bunch of isolated skills down the throats of very young children, especially in low-income communities, rather than giving them a chance to explore, discover, and love learning. But again, that's not the subject of this new book.
I just wanted to be sure that our listeners know that you have written on these topics, this many ranging topics having to do with young people, because I know this is something in this area a lot of people are concerned about. Whatever they do as parents, it seems to be undermined by some education policies that neither teachers nor parents like.
That's true. And also there's another interesting parallel, which is that what I just said about parenting beliefs and beliefs about children being conservative but accepted by people who are otherwise liberal, that precisely the same thing is true with respect to education. So, for example, virtually every large newspaper in the country, in its editorial stance, and every politician, with almost no exceptions, Democrat or Republican on the national scene, accepts a very conservative corporate-style approach to accountability, rigor, more standardized testing, bribes and threats to get compliance, and so on. So with education, as with parenting, we seem to have this sort of right-wing narrative that transcends the usual left to right continuum on other issues.
Yes, very much. You call in your new book for raising rebels. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit what you mean by that and how we might do that.
Sure. Well, I challenge the idea that kids are all self-centered and self-involved and narcissistic and so on, but then I perform what amounts to a thought experiment. Even if that turned out to be true, that kids were not as other-oriented as we might hope, why would we assume that the solution is to focus on compliance and getting kids to toe the line and do what they're told? A much more effective response would be to help kids become other-oriented, to become social activists. And so even if the premise is false, the idea of promoting a kind of reflective rebelliousness where kids question authority and are willing to organize to make life better, to improve schools and workplaces and other environments, makes a lot more sense. But here, of course, I'm not talking about what research can prove or disprove. I'm talking about our basic values, about whether our main concern is to help children simply conform to and comply with whatever they're told, or to look around and say, how can we make things better?
You continue on this theme in your book by talking about the idea that self-discipline is overrated. And in a lot of ways, of course, I know you plan on getting the attention of parents who have, are all our lives trying to figure out how do we make our children self-disciplined and so on. And so when you frame it in that way, all of us say, oh, my God, really? I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what you think parents should do on this theme of raising kids who are likely to be other-oriented and rebellious.
Well, self-discipline is in a way just a more insidious approach than discipline. Because here what we're saying is we want kids to do what they're supposed to, what they're told to do, but we don't want to have to stand around offering rewards for compliance and punishments for misbehavior and noncompliance. We want them to swallow the idea of discipline so that they have, in effect, a policeman inside them. And that's troubling to me on a political level. But even beyond that, the idea of being self-disciplined so that you persist in and pursue things without being distracted is occasionally useful, but it can be overdone as much as it can be underdone, according to research by the late Jack Block at Berkeley, who showed that over self-disciplined people tend to often to be joyless with very little variation in their affect. And other research has found that the way you internalize stuff you're told can be very different. In some cases, it can be done in an integrated and meaningful way where you make sense of this and feel that it's volitional, it's chosen. But other times, internalization and self-discipline is done in a way where you're just controlled from the inside, and that's not psychologically beneficial.
That's very interesting. Very, very important ideas for parents. Are there organizations or organizing activities or things that people are doing to kind of change this mindset, both about parenting and about schools, that you support, activity that you propose people engage in other than changing their own parenting and schooling practices?
Other than what? I'm sorry?
Other than changing their own parenting and schooling practices, I wonder if there are...
reaching out to others, right, yeah. Well, there's loads of opportunities for being organized around educational issues, especially pushing back against the corporate testing approach that's taken over. There's in fact, there has sprung up another wave of what has been going on and off for the last 20 years, which is parents refusing to let their kids take the standardized tests. Yes. There's a website called UnitedOptOut.com. Another one I recommend, FairTest, FairTest.org. and many other local and national organizations on that. Other people organizing around other issues against zero-tolerance, punitive approaches in schools, against homework, against grades, and so on. On parenting, it's trickier. There are certainly websites and podcasts and blogs around more gentle, attachment-oriented, child-centered, responsive, respectful forms of parenting. There's no centralized group. And on many of the issues that I raise here, for example, about rethinking the way we assume that kids have to earn whatever they get in life, that they need more self-discipline than self-esteem. No, I'm not aware of any attempts to organize folks. I'd be satisfied at this point if people even contemplate the possibility that what they've been led to accept on faith may not actually be true.
Thank you, and I think your book may very well help them to do that. We've been talking with Alfie Kahn, who is the author of Myth of the Spoiled Child, Challenging the Conventional Wisdom, and the book is out now and available, right, Alfie?
It is indeed.
Thank you so much for being with us. I know you are speaking in a lot of places about your work, and I'm happy to know that and very much appreciate that we have it available to read.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate your interest.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Next, we're going to speak with Dr. Muntu Davis, who works at the Alameda County Health Department, an agency that I have been long impressed by in the fact that they interpret health in Alameda County in a much broader way than is usual. And in fact, they have gone into the issue of gentrification with another organization called Just Cause, looking at how foreclosures are killing Oakland communities and families and what policy changes might reverse this picture. Dr. Davis, welcome to Education Today.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for being with us. I was just saying that I want to appreciate the fact that you work for an organization that seems to have a broader conception of health, and the fact that you are recognizing the significance of gentrification and taking some steps to study it deeply. You argue in the study that gentrification is a health issue, and in one of your recommendations you give an appalling example, the fact that although tenants have the right to remain in foreclosed properties, the landlords are turning off the water and making the property uninhabitable. I wonder if there are other examples like this where foreclosure, the mortgage crisis, and the resulting gentrification have those kinds of health impacts.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the things where, most people think that as you start to do development, gentrification is inevitable, and it just happens. Once it starts in terms of development, that the neighborhood has to change, and it doesn't have to change in that way. In many instances, we've seen where people, their rent has actually shot up, astronomically for what they can afford, simply because the area is starting to change, and it's forcing people to have to move from places that they've long called their homes.
And this is enormous in Oakland in particular, according to your study. Can you tell us something about the parameters of the amounts of gentrification that are already taking place?
Yeah, when we look at a lot of these, what we did is we looked at stages of gentrification and to get an idea of where things are happening. And I want to say this study was funded by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments, to look at this issue to sort of see what can we do around housing and gentrification. And so when we looked, really North Oakland for us has pretty much changed, and there's ongoing changes in the neighborhood. And a simple way to think of gentrification is its development with displacement of existing residents. One of the prime criteria for it happening is having a high percentage of renter households, low income, or lower income, I should say, and generally a population of color, a higher percentage of population of color. And we're starting to see changes both in West Oakland and the San Antonio area and in downtown as well.
And those changes are resulting from what economically?
Those changes are resulting from, the idea that you want to develop and do some improvement in the neighborhoods. And so it's a change to sort of attract more folks to come, and generally the attraction is for folks with a higher income. And most of these areas that we are talking about are areas that people have lived in for a long time that don't have, the places to buy the daily goods and services, grocery stores, banks, et cetera. And have not had that investment in the area to create those conditions that allow people to be healthy and live well.
So there seems to be a contradiction. I worked in the mayor's office for a while and studied gentrification actually a lot myself, and found there to be a deep contradiction between what most people think of as bettering a neighborhood and what's actually good for the residents, because as soon as the neighborhood starts to be, quote, bettered, the people who live there can't live there anymore. And so that, changes around the school their child has to go to, whether they have daycare, whether they have transportation, all the things which people who don't have money need in the neighborhood they live in, they don't get to live there anymore. So I wonder how you deal with that contradiction. What do we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, most development happens in collaboration, with a city, or if it's an unincorporated area, the county. And so there are policy decisions that can be made to sort of say, look, if development is going to come in, we'd like it to benefit the residents who are there and have some input. What do the residents actually need? And if development is going to happen, are there some things that we can look at to say that, people don't get kicked out of their place without cause. They don't get evicted without cause. There are policy decisions around that. There are other decisions that say, well, can we do something to stabilize people in their homes, if this happens, or if they have to move, is there something we can do to offset the cost that they have to incur as a result of having to move suddenly? So there are really some decisions that we can make and some protections that we can put at the policy level, even in terms of how developments occur. Does it stay focused in on what the existing neighbors need in addition to some new things to support them? And so we can shape by policy how things occur and what protections are put in place so that people can be stable in their communities.
Do you have examples of communities either in the U.S. or elsewhere that have done that successfully?
Well, it depends on the various stages. There are places, San Francisco has, some rent-controlled areas. And in some instances, there are cities that have funds that are set up so that, as a development comes in, there are certain fees that are paid, and those fees go to help people move if they need to move, so relocation cost, which really helps, especially for a family that's on a fixed income and is not, hasn't planned on having to move. So, I think it's fairly new in terms of us understanding the different stages at which gentrification is occurring, and the various policy recommendations that we put in the report are best at certain stages. So with this report, you can sort of see in various areas and what stages they're at, and then go through the report and look at, various policies, whether it's an early or a middle stage or a late stage, in terms of what things might be effective to slow things down or improve the conditions for the people who live there.
And do you have some recommendations that have to do with finance, banks, kind of pushing some of the people who have a lot of money and power to not be able to do some of the things they are doing now? Do you have hopes that those policies can pass? Do you believe there is organizing happening in that direction? What are your thoughts about the possibilities of changing some of this around?
Well, I think, it's always possible, but it's more possible when you have people understand the problem and understand that there are some solutions. It's not something that we, are throwing our hands up on. And, our main focus as a health department is to make sure that, people have the conditions they need in order to be healthy and live well. And, it takes some time, but as we understand the problems more and more, Council Host is a great partner in helping residents understand and helping them pull together and push for these policies at both the city and the county level. So I think it can happen. I think as more and more people understand the issue and understand that there actually are some solutions out there, they can be put in place. The other thing I would add is, when we have every neighborhood in a city provide the daily needs and services and have, habitable and healthy housing conditions, and they're safe, the whole city as a whole benefits. And so it's not something that is necessarily, geared towards just helping one population, but this is a population in general that needs the most help.
You made in the report some specific, statistics about the impact of gentrification on people's health declines, actually showing that people's health does decline through these various stages of gentrification. Can you say something about that?
Yeah. So in general, the way we think about it is when a person's displaced, especially when it's suddenly and they hadn't planned for it. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of emotional and financial hardship that comes with having to pay for relocation costs or losing a home, and even with increased transportation costs because you have a longer commute, having to move further out. We've seen studies have shown that there's disruption in school performance for youth. Sometimes people lose their jobs because they have difficulty getting to them because they're further away, and oftentimes they're forced to choose because their financial situation may be tougher between buying medicine or buying healthful foods, and so these things can really impact health. The other thing is when you are in a neighborhood and you've been there for a long time, there's a tremendous social network that you have. Folks that can go pick up your child if you're, running late, or folks that can babysit for you if you have an emergency. You're providing elder care, for your mother or father who's, a couple streets down. And so that network gets disrupted when people are forcefully moved from their homes, under a condition like this.
So there's a few specific policies that you propose that the city, for example, should make in terms of restrictions on landlords and banks. Can you say something about those? I'm hoping that our listeners may have the opportunity to participate in some way in trying to make these changes happen.
Well, in general, when we look at developments, coming in, for there to be a conscious effort to say, okay, what is coming in, and does this benefit, the existing residents or improve those conditions? Those things are should be in place. Can there be some assistance to help people who are in their homes and may have a temporary change in their situation in terms of their finances or their cost of housing, something to help offset that a little bit? Those things can happen as well. And so really it's about, what can banks and what can local government do to support the existing residents in whatever way they can. Making sure that, the developments that come in, sort of maintain the level of affordable housing in the area is also important. And so those things I think are key in thinking about how we make our investments.
So I wonder about on the case of affordable housing, for example, every project that I have seen that claims to have affordable housing as a component of it actually has 8 or 9 times as much housing that is basically not affordable to anybody who lives in Oakland because the rates are so high, and yet the buildings are sold, the developments are sold on the basis that there's this small portion of affordable housing. But it seems that any development actually gentrifies things further, even if it has those few, units that are available and called affordable. So, I guess I'm asking whether can gentrification really be slowed down, or are we just talking about kind of Band-Aids for the people who are being affected by it?
Well, I think it can be slowed down. It's really about us understanding what we're looking at and being conscious about saying, did what we put in place actually improve the conditions for the people who live there? And when we talk about the affordable, saying, okay, yes, a developer can come in and we want you to have a certain percentage of the units be, affordable. There are things that happen where even the people who were forced out maybe don't have the first right of refusal for those units that are supposed to be affordable. And so there are things that can happen in terms of saying, okay, look, if you were moved out, you get to actually have the first right to come in and look at this and go for it. And so I think policy decisions and policy analysis are key in order of slowing gentrification down. And again, for us to understand the stages at which gentrification occurs, I think is helpful in order to figure out what we need to do.
I wonder if a major impact of gentrification, and I believe this is true in Berkeley and certainly seems to be true in Oakland, is that it changes the ethnic composition of the city. And that seems to result from the fact that there's such a huge racial wealth gap between the median white family and the median Latino or African American family. And I wonder if you all have ideas about that, because that seems to be a huge national problem that policymakers are hardly grappling with at all.
Yeah, the widening of the income gap is one of the things that's key in this. And again, I mentioned that if you look at how you determine the stage of gentrification or vulnerability to gentrification, the first criteria is really about the vulnerable population. Again, a high proportion of renters, high proportion of people of color, and a high proportion of people with less than a bachelor's degree or a lower household income. And so it's the struggle is, can you do development and not have, the population change as drastically as it does? And I think you can. I think we just haven't put in those things those policies that allow us to really pay attention to it and at the same time support people in the places they live.
So can you tell us how people can get a copy of your recommendations? Because I know you're trying to help us to get to work on these issues, and I think it would be helpful for people to be able to read the document.
Well, they can go to our website, which is www.acphd.org, and they can also go to Casa Justa's website and get it from there as well. So it's in both places. So
Casa Justa is an activist organization, also called Just Cause in English, and the Alameda County Health Department is the other place where you can get a copy of this very important report about gentrification. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for your work and for being with us today. I also want to thank our engineer, Michael Yoshida, our producer, Jaron Epstein, and thank you very much for being with us. To our listeners, I'm your host, Kitty Kelly Epstein. We air on the second and fourth Fridays of each month, and we'll be talking again soon. Thanks.
This April 15th, KPFA is celebrating another milestone.
It's our birthday.
Broadcasting actually started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on April 15th, 1949.
This is Scoop Nisker, and I want to wish KPFA a happy birthday. 65 years. You're almost as old as I am.
Please listen. We have some great premiums for those who donate.
This is Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and I just want to say thank you for 65 great years of free speech radio. Here's to 65 years more of informing and inspiring the East Bay.
If you have some spare time, please come down. We need phone room volunteers all day long.
This is Starhawk. You're one that's always been there for me. When a war breaks out, when a riot is happening, when the cops are beating on somebody, you're always there.
That's this Tuesday, Pacifica's 65th anniversary.
Happy birthday, KPFA.
Happy birthday, KPFA.
Happy birthday, KPFA.
Hello, everyone. This is Karen Sanders, and I'm inviting you to tune in Thursdays at 1 p.m. for The Herbal Highway, a show about everything having to do with medicinal herbs. So please, come join us Thursdays at 1 p.m. for The Herbal Highway.
And you are listening to 94.1 KPFA in Berkeley, 89.3 KPFA.